This is Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic. And now your host, Michael O'Fallon.
So over the past year and a half or so, we have been pressured and forced to stay at home, to take the abundance of cautions to ensure that we did not come together as a family. Because we were told we were a danger to one another. We were told to only stay in our small family groups, not to mix with other families, to avoid going out into public, to avoid coming together for church, at playgrounds, and with our friends. But one warning that was articulated far and wide from Democrats and their loyal, bootlicking Rhino Republican friends was, stay at home. Avoid being with the elderly, because you will kill Grandma. And when people fought with Governor Cuomo about being able to be together at Christmas with their families, they were scolded. So you want to kill Grandma? Stay at home, you selfish moron. Now, some of those crazy conservatives bucked the trend of the saving Grandma narrative. This was most clearly expressed by Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. This is what he said. Quote, "No one reached out to me and said, as a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren?" The 69-year-old Patrick said. "And if that's the exchange, I'm all in." And of course, that Lieutenant Governor Patrick, that old crazy guy that was clinging to his guns and his Bible, and obviously an evil nationalist, I mean, we are all in this together as global citizens, aren't we? He needed to be shunned. And man, was he shut down right away. What a genocidal nut that Lieutenant Governor Patrick was. Lieutenant Governor Patrick was obviously trying to cull the older population of America. He wanted to kill Grandma. Well, Joe Biden and his administration continued the "so all of you want to kill your grandparents" line early in the administration, blaming those that did not receive the magical non-working mystery serum known as not caring about killing their grandma. So, let's review. In 2020, the primary reason that Democrats and technocrats, by the way, you should be getting used to saying the word technocrat, the primary reason in 2020 why you had to stay at home, not go to school, shut down your business, lose everything that you saved all of your life is that you didn't want to kill Grandma. And you do love your grandmother, right? So you will stay at home in order to ensure that Amazon's profits and control of the marketplace grows out of control and crushes the dreams and lives of small business owners. And of course, that was the practical result of saving Grandma. Saving Grandma meant, and maybe you didn't know this, but saving Grandma meant helping Amazon. And saving Grandma also meant ensuring that all of your church's services be piped through and monitored by Facebook and YouTube. Because it was important beyond all things to protect Grandma. But also, if Granddad got ill, it was important to make sure that Grandma was not at his bedside while he was taking life's final journey. Because Grandma might shorten his life for a day if she brought in COVID. Or if Grandpa had COVID, he might kill Grandma too. So you had to keep couples that have been together for the last 50 or 60 years apart to protect them both. Of course, this was in their best interests, because COVID changes everything. Everything needs to be reset because of COVID. And so if Grandpa died, depending on what state you were in, you might be able to have a funeral. But if you did have a funeral, maybe only 5 people would be allowed to attend. I mean, Grandpa wasn't George Floyd. And of course, those 5 people had to remain socially distanced. So, in order to protect Grandma, you had to leave Grandma alone in her grief, socially and emotionally separated from her family, from her sons and her daughters, and especially from those filthy grandkids. So at Grandpa's funeral, Grandma was treated like a leper, like an outcast, like a bad girl who'd been sent to a corner, alone, in desperate anguish, in need of consolation, and alone. Because this was all for Grandma's safety. Because first and foremost, you didn't want to kill Grandma. That is why you went through all of this insane ridiculousness. And in the one most important time that Grandma needed her family left her alone. The family fractured the family for Grandma's protection. Now, of course, you couldn't prepare Grandma or yourself by getting hydroxychloroquine, a Z-Pak, prednisone, enormous amounts of zinc, D3, and C, because that would be killing Grandma too, according to the experts that were on all the social media companies. And Lord forbid if you got her stuff that you gave to horses. And by that, I don't mean penicillin, amoxicillin, aspirin, oatmeal, or water, those things you get for horses too. I mean specifically ivermectin, the human variety that won the Nobel Prize for medicine. Because if you gave any of these now proven medications to Grandma, or maybe you gave them to Grandpa, well, see, you would have killed them then. That's what you were being told. Because black is white and white is black. On a side note, I mean, even though those medications helped me and my wife and my family, you had to trust Grandpa's doctor. The doctor that first diagnosed that Grandpa had the disease and told him to take an ibuprofen and come back if his symptoms got worse. And when Grandpa's symptoms did get worse from the circulatory disease known as COVID-19, even though his oxygen level was still at 93, well, that doctor placed him in a coma and intubated him, giving him a 20% chance of survival. And Grandpa died. Alone. Because you didn't want to kill Grandma. And Grandma grieved for months. Alone. But then, Grandma saw some of President Trump's rallies. And Grandma saw President Trump power through COVID. And Grandma saw that President Trump was doing a rally just a few miles from her house. And Grandma wanted to go. But she was told, look, Grandma, for your safety, you need to stay away from crowds and stay home. You can still vote from home through our new ballot system here in Pennsylvania. And so Grandma obeyed. Because this was all about protecting Grandma. And the amazing thing is that Grandma didn't just vote once. She voted 4 times for Biden, amazingly. And what is even more incredible, somehow Grandpa voted for Biden 3 times too. And Joe Biden, after the polls were shut down over water mains breaking, well, actually a toilet was just overflowing, and after fresh, crisp, just printed ballots showed up, Joe Biden was elected as president of the United States. Now, Grandma was starting to get skeptical about a couple of things. And during the lockdown, Grandma discovered things like YouTube, Rumble, and some of her friends encouraged her to get on Telegram. And one day she was listening to this guy named Dr. Mercola, and then Dr. Shiva, and then a few other doctors. And Grandma started to think for herself, regardless of what President Trump was telling her to do at the time. Grandma decided that she was not going to get the vaccine. And you know, that old battleship grandma, even though she is 69, here's something else. She's still working, was working hard, now albeit from home. She had been working at United Airlines for years. You see, Grandpa was a pilot back in the day, back when men were allowed to notice that a woman was pretty, and were allowed to tell a woman that she is attractive without being accused of rape. See, back in the day, Grandma was quite a beautiful gal, and Grandpa noticed, and he swept her off her feet. They literally traveled the world together, and they had a beautiful family. And when the kids were out of the house, she went back to the job that she loved. She went back to work for the airline. Because she loved serving people. She loved helping people. And at this point, after listening to a lot of other opinions besides what just was pushed onto her phone 10 times a day, what the news was telling her 24 hours a day, what every print magazine was telling her, what every website was telling her, she started to have a mind of her own and not be afraid anymore. And she'd already lost her husband. So she wanted to get back to work at the office. So Grandma decided that she wanted some freedom back. And she moved from Pennsylvania to Miami, Florida to work full-time again for United Airlines. And United hired her back. Because Grandma was great. And wouldn't you know it, about 4 weeks into working, this is what happened. Grandma got the virus. Yep, she got COVID-19. And my gosh, you were thinking, after all that we did to try to protect Grandma could die. But here's the thing. Do you remember how Grandma was listening to Dr. Shiva, Dr. Mercola, and all of those folks? Well, she also listened to one of their guests on their show from America's Frontline Doctors. And Grandma, about a month before, already had ivermectin, a Z-Pack, prednisone, lots of zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D3. And you know what? Grandma was over COVID in about 6 days. I mean, her symptoms only lasted about 3 days. And after a few weeks after being cleared, Grandma went back to work. And now she wasn't just Grandma, she was Super Grandma with super antibodies. So Grandma really got back to life. She started going back to church. She started playing tennis again with her friends. Heck, Grandma went back to Zumba at her Silver Sneakers class. Grandma was coming out of her funk after losing Grandpa. And Grandma was insisting that she see her grandkids. And then she heard Joe Biden on the news start talking about mandates. And she also heard Rochelle Walensky, that CDC director that was working for the Communist Chinese Party-controlled T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Well, she was pushing mandates too. And then she heard Minnie Mao, Dr. Wen on CNN. She's the one that smiles as she tells you how she's going to destroy your life. And then she got the memo from United Airlines. She would have to get the jab, or she would lose her job. Jab or job? That is the question. And so Grandma, with not much left in her savings, left her job at United. It was a sad day. And then she decided to move to her sisters in the Soviet Republic of California. She needed to be with somebody that loved her, someone who she could relate to. So she moved. And when she arrived, she started to get some strange pains in her back and was having some other weird medical issues. So she went into the hospital. And get this, after all this, apparently now Grandma needs a kidney transplant. So Grandma got ready, did what was necessary, called all of her family. But then the hospital called her. And they said because of the mandate against the unvaccinated, that they would not give her the kidney transplant. What? Yep. Because of Joe Biden's mandates and United Airlines mandates, Grandma was now penniless, sleeping on a couch at her sister's place and facing certain death. That is, unless she took the vaccine. Because basically, Joe Biden was now saying, "Look here, you worthless widow. I'm going to take everything you own, leave you penniless, and watch you die if you don't take the mystery potion. You take that vaccine, or I'm going to let you die in poverty." Now, this is quite a change from what the Democrats were saying just earlier this year when they were saying, "Take the vaccine because you don't want to kill Grandma." And now the Democrats, the BlackRock-controlled companies, are saying in unison, "Take the vaccine, Grandma, or die." So it's now okay for the government to kill Grandma. If Grandma hasn't obeyed the tyrannical mandates to get vaccinated, she will be denied health care, transplants, and necessary medical attention. Joe Biden and BlackRock-affiliated companies don't care if Grandma dies. It's also now okay for the government and BlackRock-affiliated companies to starve you, bankrupt you, and take your home. If you don't obey the tyrannical mandates to get vaccinated, you will lose your job, lose your income, and have your family cast out onto the street. It's also now okay for the government and BlackRock-affiliated companies to tell you where you can and can't go. If you don't obey the tyrannical mandates to get vaccinated, you will not be allowed to travel. You will not be allowed to eat out or go to a concert in certain cities in the United States. Because it is now okay for the current administration and BlackRock to tell you that you must support neo-Marxist and discriminatory ideologies. If you don't incorporate ESG, DEI, and CRT into your business, you will be cast out of their new economy that is built on these concepts. You see, they built the concepts for them and to squeeze you out. And so it's also okay for the current administration and BlackRock-affiliated companies to place an actual embargo on our citizens, to starve them out, to destroy small businesses that depend on the sale of those goods. The reason? This is what they're telling you now. This is actually coming from the Department of the Treasury, because not enough people are vaccinated. That's why they're doing this. So it's now okay for the current administration and BlackRock-affiliated companies to form a blockade against auto manufacturing, drive up the price of used autos, drive up the price of gas to push our nation into their ESG-compliant electric vehicle ride-sharing concepts. And it is now okay for the Gospel Coalition and the Roman Catholic-directed social justice warriors to tell you that obedience to tyranny is freedom. And you wonder if you should have spent more time reading Orwell and maybe Sowell than Piper and Keller. And so now you begin to realize that there has been a revolution while you've been worried about COVID over the past year and a half. And you realize that the organizations and people that I just mentioned are at the controls of power. And you aren't. So how did we get here? How did we go from "don't kill Grandma" to holding Grandma hostage with a syringe at her head? Well, just like everything else, one tiny step at a time. You let these tyrants tell you how to run your life this last year. You let these tyrants tell you how to proceed with your own health. You let these tyrants create a scheme where everything is always a life or death proposition. You let these tyrants control your liberties. And now, these tyrants control your nation and your life. And they couldn't care less if Grandma dies. Grandma must obey the tyrants, or Grandma dies. Grandma dies penniless, broken, and shattered. And we're not in the streets about this yet. And for some reason, we're not opposing this with everything that we have yet. You must stand. You must stand. Because they don't want you to stand. They want you on your knees. And so you should say what Frederick Douglass said in 1868. Quote, "Freedom is valued not only for its intrinsic worth, but what it costs. And a people to whom liberty is given will never prize it as highly, defend it as bravely, or wear it as proudly as a nation that wrenched it from the hand of tyranny. So stand you must, and stand with courage, and stand with conviction, and stand while speaking out with a loud voice. We must win." I'm Michael O'Fallon, and this has been Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic.